afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Kandis, Wyatt, and I am here with a team of researchers to have a conversation today about artificial intelligence. So we have a research team of 5 people. 3 people are here today. Myself, who is Kandis Wyatt. We have Robert Gordon, who is here in the front row. And we also have Shelley Pumphrey, who's in the front row as well. So we hope for this to be very collegial, very interactive, and a conversation about what AI is today and what we want it to be in the future. So I'm going to stop on this slide for a second. What is your definition of artificial intelligence? Can anybody tell me your thoughts? Okay.
A human program construct to simulate intelligence as in humans.
Okay, that's the great research answer. Okay. So, yes.
Well, 40 years ago, I defined it as anything we don't know how to do.
Yeah.
Because as soon as we know how to do it, it's not artificial intelligence, it's algorithm.
I think that's a great answer as well. Okay, Shelley?
Technology that thinks for us.
Yeah, technology that thinks for us. I wish I could clone myself. I keep saying there's more work than hours in the day, and if we could find some way for something to do that for us, that would be great. But it just has to think like us and act like us and have ethics and morals like us as well. So as you can see, like you said, AI isn't a new term. It's been around for decades. And depending on where you are around the globe, AI is more prevalent than you may think. So we're going to talk about some of the ways that AI is infusing into our daily lives. So let's use this definition for our discussion today. Artificial intelligence, technology systems, and processes have become a routine part of daily living and working activities. Here are a couple of things that you might think about when you think about AI. Decision making. Do you turn right? Do you turn left? Do you move straight? Virtual assistants. How many of us have a phone that can talk to us? I know I do. Sometimes it talks without me even asking it. And then self-driving features. There are now autonomous vehicles, autonomous RVs, there's autonomous rigs. I mean, autonomous vehicles is becoming more and more common. And then as a professor, I teach at APIS. Automated grading is becoming more and more prevalent. So who knows, I might not have a job in a decade. It might be replaced by some type of automated system. So these are some of the things that we're going to talk about for today's presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Shelley, and Shelley's going to talk about some of the research that this group has been doing in AI and some of the background behind the research project.
Well, actually, the research that we're going to, do I need that?
Yep,
Yes.
for the recording.
Okay. The research that we are going to be doing, so this is very interactive, would greatly appreciate your thoughts, your ideas as we move through this. So the group of us, the 5 of us, got together earlier in 2019, and we decided that we were all very interested in, let's see, where's the down?
Yep.
Very interested in artificial intelligence, and since we're in the educational field, we're really super interested in what faculty think and what students think. I worked for, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but I worked for an organization a decade or so ago, and I've been doing a lot of the literature research, and I've been breaking that down by decades. And the interesting thing is, how many of you believe that the millennials and the iGens are better equipped to use technology? Do you think they're better than us? Yeah. Do you think they're more apt to jump in and try something new? Yeah, you do? You believe that? Well, some of our research really indicated that no, they're not any more likely to jump into new technology than the boomers are. They're just as afraid of trying something new as what they look at their older counterparts in the workforce. You give them texting applications, you give them GPSs, you give them dating applications, and they jump right in. But when they start to look at things like shareware, for example, something that we use in business quite often, their response is, I don't know anything about that. Nobody's taught me how to use that. And they're just as afraid as the boomers are. So some of those things got us thinking about, well, how likely are they, students, to accept artificial intelligence? And then how likely are the faculty who might fear that this is going to replace them? I mean, how many of you go to any of the grocery stores, Walmart, Target, where you scan your own items?
Mhm.
Yep, yeah.
I do.
Yeah, and if you're on any kind of social media, you see all kinds of messages now about how we, the customer, are not trained to be the clerks. We are not trained to do the scanning, and we are taking away jobs. Are we?
Yep, I've heard it. I've
Are
heard
we?
it.
Yep, yep. Okay. So, well then, anybody here faculty besides us? Any other faculty? Okay. So, all right. Do you believe that artificial intelligence is going to take your job away? Yeah, yeah,
I'd like
absolutely.
to take some of my job.
Some of your job away.
want to.
I
yeah,
want to take some of it away.
Okay,
yeah.
The unfun parts.
right.
Yeah, the unfun parts, yes. Like grading, maybe?
Well, I'm not an academic, but
Okay.
if I were, I suppose I would.
Doing those long, reading those long papers, especially when you come around the holidays and you want to spend time with your family, wouldn't it be great? Well, what about actually in the classroom? Anybody here teach online?
Just us.
No? Okay. Well, you know, back in the late 80s and the 90s, when we were talking about artificial intelligence, one of the big things that came up was online teaching, online schools. Are they just as rigorous as the education you would get if you sat in a classroom? How do you know that the person online is the person they say they are? You know, these were all things that came about as negative comments and arguments against any type of online training, online schools, online degrees.
I'd like to point out, because I remember this was a rumor because I started online teaching very early on and took online classes, and there was a prevalent rumor at the time that the degree, the actual certificate, would look different if it came from an online institution. Because I would get that question constantly from students, like, will my degree look different? Is it going to say like online at the top? And I was like, no, it comes from an academic institution. It's the same.
It's
degree.
accredited. It's,
But that was a very prevalent question, and I remember it seemed so odd for me because I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, good point,
But-
good point.
For a long time, that was a question I'd get in every class.
So ethics was definitely an issue, right? Whether or not it was going to be the same type of degree, whether or not the individual was getting the same type of treatment, would come out with the same skills, as well as faculty. Were we spending the same amount of time? Did we provide the quality feedback that somebody would if they were meeting with a student face to face? So let's see, go ahead.
Have you ever had students come to office hours? Doesn't happen.
Not as often, but go ahead, yeah, go ahead.
Rarely, but I find I'm more apt, and I put it out there because I know that they'll do it. I tell them to text me,
Yeah,
and I get a lot of texts, and I find that I like it better because it gives me time to answer them. And I can do it on my own time, and I say text me anytime because, you know, if it comes in late at night, well, I'll answer in the morning when I get a chance. But
But that is basically online.
yeah,
pretty much.
Yes, yes.
And just to piggyback on what you said, I have students from around the globe. So the standard traditional office hours model no longer fits. And so to your point, I usually set up one-on-one appointments with the students. And like you said, many times they'll send their questions or their concerns ahead of time. That gives us time as the instructor to have a better, more well-rounded answer for them to serve them. So I actually think it works better in the long run.
I'm agreeing with you.
In the long run.
Quality, not quantity.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Our school, forgive me, I can't remember how many years ago, 3 years ago maybe, we were required online to have office hours and an online Adobe or something
Yeah,
to
Adobe Room,
interact.
yeah.
And the faculty didn't like it because they had to sit at their computer
Yeah, for 3
and
hours.
nothing would come in. The students actually didn't like it because, as you pointed out, they're all over the globe if they're online. So what do you do when they want to meet you at 2 o'clock in the morning? Well, we found ways, and we did away with the required office hours. Now it's just a matter of being available. And wouldn't it be great if artificial intelligence also enhanced that availability for us? So one of the key things that we are looking at in our research, and we have submitted our project to our IRB, and hopefully we will get the response very soon, and we'll begin to do the actual research beyond the literature review in early 2020 and move through that. So next year we'll give you the results. But one of the things that we're really focused on is the ethics around it. What are the perceived ethical issues that faculty, students, and others, well, even the accreditation boards, what do they think? What kind of obstacles might we encounter as we move forward? So we are trying to gather as much information now as possible. So our ethical issues look at curriculum design, and the applications such as teacher bots. So we're looking at technology as well as perspectives, what people are thinking about. The significance of this project initially is focused on our one school. But we see opportunities to expand as we get the research results in and additional questions may come up. We can look at a broader perspective. It's definitely looking at the social cognitive learning theory. Well, if we get the perspective of the end users, that's the best way to design any type of program, curriculum, course, because if the end users don't support it, what's going to happen? Nothing, absolutely nothing. Yeah, they're not going to enroll in the classes. If they do get into the classes, they're not going to be interactive. Do you think the student is going to know the difference between a live teacher and a teacher bot? Think they will?
Teacher bot's gonna be more reliable.
Okay.
I get the impression you're in favor of artificial intelligence.
I'll make a general statement.
No, that's
20 years-
good.
20 years from now, there will not be a single job that can't be done better by a machine than by a human.
Wrong.
Okay, what do you think? Good. Why do you say no?
Okay, I teach a leadership course at the United Nations for young Asian professionals.
Great.
I teach them how to read rooms. Okay, a bot is not going to be able to tell a student why they should pick up the book that was in the breakfast room that was in Spanish. Why, if I don't know Spanish, why would I look at that? Because the bibliographies are in English sometimes. You need to know the books that are in English if you're only speaking English. So pick that book up, look at it. I can tell you what a room
A human
looks
won't
like.
do that.
A human will do it. I'm a
Machine-
human. Human won't do it.
How
A
many people
machine
have
will
picked
do
up a
it.
Spanish book?
That's why I say that.
A machine can do that, a human probably
Yeah,
won't.
sorry about that, but I disagree.
No,
And I do it. Last name Jordan, 23A, give me the ball.
This is perfect. This is exactly what we're looking for today, and in the future. So please, I've got a couple of handouts. If anybody wants copies of this, get in touch with us. And any ideas that you have or questions or you think that we might want to focus on, this is great. We're not looking for folks who agree with us or agree with us 100%, because, well, one, what kind of fun is that, doing any kind of research with that? And what results will we get that are usable? We are planning to do a mixed method methodology. We are planning to do a survey. We're going to survey our students as well as our faculty. Obviously, it'll be anonymous. Go ahead. You look like you're ready to say something.
I'm listening.
Okay, so we're going to do our students and our faculty. We're going to do a quantitative survey, and then we will go back and do a qualitative survey where we get to, ask more questions about why they think what they think or why they answered what they answered, and of course bring that all together.
And I don't know if everyone here knows American Public University, but we have a student body of around 75,000 students, all online. And I can't remember how many thousands of faculty, but it's a combination of full-time and part-time. So it's a very large group that we're taking a look at, because we really want to see like a large data set when it comes to this. So I'm just giving people perspective.
But you need to do informed consent, so people
Oh,
don't
yes.
know they might be in the
Of course.
experiment.
Oh, yes.
They don't know
Yeah.
which arm of it.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's
But they
part of the-
know they're somehow involved, right?
And that's part of our IRB process, which we are currently
Yeah.
going through. So once the institution is kind of agreed, and they'll give us the parameters that we can operate under, then we can move forward. So
Yeah.
this is all preliminary before we get to that point.
So I'm not a professor yet. Anyway, I've got an invitation to teach in an online capacity, and I've been taking online courses just to kind of see what seems to be working and all. But I'm with the Navy, and one of our problems is teaching people to do certain things, often skills, but not, often technical skills, and maintain them over time, especially emergency, response and
Okay,
things like
gotcha.
that. Disaster drills, we call them, sometimes when we're in play company. But, so I'm interested from that perspective. And one of the challenges that I have in my mind is, there's something, simulators are actually far superior places to teach certain things than an actual airplane or a ship. But I'm kind of intrigued by how you would deploy training aids in small spaces or
Okay.
remotely.
I
Is
want to
that-
give it a shot
do you
because I
have-
have a little bit
yeah.
of background in on the ship side. I know that with some of the U.S. unions we operate, they have their own training centers, and within those training centers, they have multiple simulators for ship handling, and they have setups where you can have a network system where you can have, I think, with one you can have up to 6 different captains operating ships, or you can have one captain and 5 simulated captains all in operation. So that way you can do, for example, ships in the area, ships under tug, and then you can have the captain of the tug operating, the captain on the ship, captains and other ships in the areas, and they will offer different scenarios. Okay, a line snaps. Now what? Now what do you do? Okay, the currents are now changing. Loss of power. What do you do? So that application's kind of already happening.
So there, I think we probably have some similar things, the Navy, but
Oh,
then
sure.
you send those captains out to sea, how do they maintain those skills when they're out there? And so, we just had some collisions in the Navy about 2 years ago, where this was the source of the problem. Well, aside from the fact that we don't do a very good job of human interfaces, but the crews were not current, and they made a whole string of mistakes. So I'm kind of interested in, could you do something using some of this online technology to help maintain those skills out in the real world? Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm not.
No, this is
derail
good.
you.
Well, in answer to your question, right now, a lot of major firms monitor the work that all their people do. How many applications you process and stuff like that. The Navy can monitor its people and look for places where they get lax. I mean, there's lots of ways of doing it without explicitly doing classes.
How do you measure getting lax in disaster response without creating a disaster
Well,
for
you
them
can-
to do? That's the fun part, right? I can monitor whether or not I'm paying a lot of attention when I'm on helm, and the corrections I make and all this other stuff, right? But that's different from, I think I've got a failure, right?
I've seen some interesting research and also in kind of like proactive disaster recovery. with vessels and collisions. And it's interesting because typically, and the drills that normally I've gone through in the past have been, okay, this happens, and now you start discussing what you're gonna do and you work out your next move. I've seen studies in other organizations that have done this, not all do this, other ones that instead of doing that initial brainstorming to determine the next step, they determine the worst case and then take all those actions necessary for the worst case. So then they immediately deploy all the resources that may be required and then figure out what's really happening. Because a lot of times when you get that initial data shoreside from the ship, it's incomplete and tends to be inaccurate because at that point no one really knows on board and your captain's going to make the best guess, which turns out not to be pretty accurate actually.
Yeah.
So
But I was thinking that maybe in a school like APU, you might have curriculum that requires hands-on skills or interaction or something already.
There are some courses in some fields that require an internship at the university level. When it comes to hands-on, it reminds me of the box of rocks.
Yeah.
Geology class where the students are mailed a box of rocks, which is then part of their curriculum. So there is some components of hand-on, even though it's online. There's a push more for simulations that we have. I know in some of my courses we have various project management simulations. So I hear what you're saying, but at the core of the question, and it keeps rattling in my head now because, okay, how do you determine the deficiencies in an individual skills? Meaning, okay, you've given them education, you've given them training, but how do you find those deficiencies before it becomes an incident?
Yeah, and I would think that AI would have some value here.
Yes, I agree because, and I'll give you the only example I know, which is in math. There are math programs that will then level you, figure out where you are by giving you questions and if you answer them correctly or not, and then it will determine where you are, give you that baseline, and then start giving you progressively harder questions until you reach a level of mastery which is acceptable to pass the course.
That's exactly one of the visions of AI, is that it can think and customize based on where a given individual is. So if disaster recovery plans, things like that, and disaster recovery training, just as an example, somebody might retain more than someone else. Well, when you go into the AI system, if you've retained something, you don't necessarily have to redo those skills, right? But then the AI would identify, all right, this is where you are, this is the level where you are, so we'll start from here and customize that curriculum for that individual.
I have to throw out this example just because and this is an AI example, okay. There's some AI programs out there that determine your level of language and understanding and vocabulary. Okay, I take them. My wife always does much better than me in all of those tests, even though, and it's because of one reason. It's not that she knows the words, it's because she learned Latin, and so she could parse the words, and so she then can look at the words and say, oh. And what the AI started doing was then sending words that were Greek and because it reaches at a higher level. So, okay, you're going to get all these words. Now I got to give you something that you don't know, and so then she'll not be able to parse the Greek words. And so I can I know vocabulary. I know English. These are the words I know. If it's a word I know, I can do it. If it's not, I have nothing.
Well, how many of you teach at the lowest denominator in your class? If meeting the objectives of the course, but if there's somebody in your course who is slowing down everybody else, have you ever had that experience? So that you've got to make sure that you use your activities, your discussions, whatever you're doing to meet the lowest level of student in the course, instead of having each individual student have a customized plan for that course. Now, they'll all get to the same objectives, the same learning objectives, but maybe some need a little more time in one area than another, or instead of, okay, since one person needs a lot more time in debits and credits, well, the whole class is being held up on debits and credits, just as an example if we were doing accounting. On the other hand, if the instructor, the professor, had a way to gauge where each individual is and didn't have to spend a lot of time because the AI did it for them, was able to customize the work and the curriculum and the learning outcomes assessment for them so that each student, you still have that personal interaction there, but we as professors can work a little more effectively and efficiently because we're not focusing on those who are taking longer or leaving them behind because another group in the class are really catching on to this and we're moving so far ahead that some of the others just have completely lost it and given up. Do you think that the AI will help us, the vision of the AI, will help us kind of balance that out for all of our students?
I'd say yes, because this is a technique. My wife teaches 3rd grade, and she often will use pullouts with students that are at a lower level than the rest of the class. And then they will get either with the teacher's aide or someone else to give them individual attention to bring them up in order to get them to the level that the class is at. So that way the rest of the class isn't suffering through that lowest level. But the thing there is that requires resources. You know, the problem is when she's alone and she doesn't have a teaching assistant, she doesn't have someone else, it's like, well, what do? You know, I can't make everyone suffer, so she does what she can. You know, she'll maybe give the rest of the students some other project to work on and then work with that student or a couple students. So it does happen, it's just now resource. So I see where artificial intelligence can help bridge that because now you can give them the resource. And in some cases, at the elementary school level, there are, again, you know, programs that can help with that. So,
Not just elementary, I think that we can take that through all levels, possibly.
yeah, all levels, but I've not seen it at the higher levels yet.
So could an AI, and you're talking in terms of AI being able to detect the level, that's one thing I'm hearing. Another one might be to help them catch up. What about people who have some sort of learning difference, tailoring to that? I'm in the process of sending a lot of very, very smart technicians back to school because we need to make them engineers so we can promote them. And it's interesting to watch their struggles, and we usually find out why they dropped out and joined the Navy to begin with, right? And a lot of it is how people learn. So are you doing anything in that department with this, and can I help there?
Awesome.
Good.
Can you
Yeah.
help? I like that.
No, I'm asking, you know, are you all thinking about that already? Probably.
Part of the vision is several steps. One is identifying the individual student's needs, any deficiencies, whatever in their prior experience, deficiency not the right word, so that you then identify where they are, you customize what meets their needs to bring them up to meeting the objectives, and then you also have that implementation. Okay, here's what you need, here's the interaction that will take you to this next step. And then each individual, if you've got, one of my friends showed me this, I couldn't believe it. What's the average size of most classes today? What would you estimate the average size of most?
Depends on the level.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, say, no, grade school,
35.
35?
really?
25. Wow. I was gonna say 20.
Is it really
It
35?
varies by state.
Depends on the area.
Oh, it depends what
And
state.
area and county,
That
even.
is
Yeah.
terrible.
Well,
And hence why Florida is not ranked high.
oh,
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm
Well,
from
it's like-
Nevada, so.
Oh, okay.
it's a popular area to live. Here in Maryland, I believe the class size is capped at 25.
Yeah, when we were in school, and I went to school in Baltimore, we had 47 kids in our 1st through 8th grade classes, and one teacher. And you were talking about, or somebody was talking about learning styles. You know, I could not learn in a traditional classroom. I struggled all the way through college and through my master's degree, and my parents, God bless them, kept telling me, "You're just not studying hard enough."
Mm-hmm. And look where you are now.
Well, somebody's dyslexic, but also visual, tactile learners, whatever.
Yes.
How does a tactile learner do things online? I mean, maybe sometimes the answer, because we use a lot of online curriculum in this program where I'm trying to boost up some of our people in terms of formal education. Some of them, the answer is a tutor, you know, because they're not getting some subjects in the online environment. I don't know whether it's the online that's a problem or.
Well, I think part of it is online is not just the discussion boards, and it doesn't mean that you're sitting at the computer to do everything. There are still activities that you do outside. There might be team building activities that you do with those who are local to you or something like that. I'm sorry, and I
Oh,
interrupted.
I want to be cognizant of the time, but just to touch on your point, we talked about simulations. And so something that's very closely related to AI is virtual reality.
Yeah.
So to your point, there are some people that just learn differently. And even in the online environment, we're constantly trying to find ways for people who learn by, seeing, doing, hearing, and trying to incorporate that into the online environment.
Okay, so you're doing like VR and
In-
augmented reality.
In some of the curriculums, absolutely.
But I want to use a personal example because I always thought it was kind of funny about tactile learning. There's certain things that are tactile learning that you need to do and you need to practice. My daughter turned 18. She got her driver's license. I at that time had a Mustang that was a manual transmission, and so she learned on my wife's automatic so she could drive. And so she then went and watched some YouTube videos on how to drive a stick. And then she came and said, okay, well, I want to drive. So I said, go for it. Here are the keys. Pull the car out of the spot. Well, watching a YouTube video doesn't really give you the feel to drive a manual transmission vehicle.
Which was an important lesson.
How much did the new clutch cost you?
She couldn't even get it out. She couldn't even get it out of park. She was
Yeah.
Actually stripping the gear.
well. So.
Well, but that's a lesson too, right?
Yeah.
That's a really important
Yeah.
lesson, to know
But-
what you can and can't learn, and
Absolutely.
Well, and that's what I think some of the online schools have been discovering too, from the early 90s, that, okay, it's a discussion board and you do an assignment, or write a paper, or do a test, and you get your degree. I mean, we have evolved tremendously from that, discussion boards aren't that big a deal anymore. It's more the different ways that we learn. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Because of the availability of big data, AI is probably going to be much more capable of detecting these learning difficulties and differences than a typical teacher would be.
that I think, I can grant you that it might use subtler cues or different cues. And I think as people, we have mindsets, and we can't see some of the data, So
Well,
in
we
that
haven't seen
sense,
some of the
yes.
data.
And to your
Yeah.
point there, with some of the massively online classrooms, the MOOCs which are out there, there are ones that do programming, and I was interested because I was reading about what they were doing there. And in the grading process there, since there's automated grading happening, it'll take a look at your code, but they started finding that people, they take this lesson, they're supposed to develop this code, it didn't look like that, but there were people that kind of went down the wrong rabbit hole. They made some logical errors, and then they made code that looked like this. And so then it was different to grade and to interact with the student on the ones that went down that rabbit hole, to explain to them what the error they made in the beginning before they started coding, rather than the actual ones that kind of went along, because that was a different error than just making an error in your code or in this, it
An
was a-
architectural.
correct, architectural design problem from the beginning.
But how do you separate a person who made that architectural error from the person who was brilliant and comes up with a whole different way of looking at the
Well,
problem?
That's a very good
That's a
point.
good point, and the
Yeah.
problem is that the system will likely find it in error,
Yes.
because it will
Well,
not
yeah.
conform.
That's
Although a
what
lot of
human
people
teacher.
Yeah.
will do the same thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, true.
But because I want that out of the box thinker. I want the person who says, you know, if we did it like this, we'd use
Mhm.
a lot less, and it isn't obvious, but
Which is more dangerous, personal bias or machine bias?
Good question.
yeah.
I come from a different kind of experience because I just finished teaching last spring the first women's studies class ever offered to Title I, or to high schoolers in Northern Nevada, Title I. And I just don't think this would have been viable whatsoever because I believe that, at least for that particular subject, not to say that it wouldn't be viable in other subjects, I think that the extremely tangible, life-changing results that I had anonymously reported to me for almost every student in my class were all on the basis of the personal interaction, of self-advocacy, of certain things that I did that were absolutely a function of even the way that I look and the stature that I have and how unintimidating and trauma sensitive I made the class, because the whole value of the class was that it was relevant and personal, that I brought in my own family members as speakers, that I brought in, drag queen from the local community and like women in, leadership positions and things like that. And I just don't think, even right down to doing the adverse childhood experiences study, that survey within my class anonymously, and then showing people the graphs to destigmatize some of these taboo topics and be like, look, we all have these experiences. If you can't look around the room and know these are all my fellow students that I am sharing this kind of consensual, collaborative environment and these super taboo, often uncomfortable topics with, I just don't think it would have had any resonance. If I had taught the same class online, and also keeping in mind that the majority of my students were English second language, some of whom were undocumented, things like that, I think I probably would have lost almost all of them. I don't think they would have been able to complete it, let alone take tangible, experiential results from it, because a lot of it was resting in like the dynamism of just me standing up there and acting out an example in real time, that kind of thing. So I just don't know if for topics like that, when you're talking about self-advocacy and communication and things like that, it would have been possible.
Well, any comments?
I agree with where you're going with this, and it kind of reminds me of an interesting learning example, again with AI recently. I can't remember if it was Siri or another AI one, where when the individual asked their phone, how do I commit suicide? The answer should not be telling them how to commit
Right,
suicide.
exactly.
It should be relating them to get help.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're asking these questions and you're having that in your mind, it's probably not a good idea to tell them how to do it. And so on all the smartphones now, if you ask them, it directs you to help and services. But it was not programmed that way, because the original AI programming was, I am being asked for information on a topic, I will provide information on the topic.
Well, even just getting people to share their experiences required a lot of trust, and so establishing trust for a machine.
Well, go ahead.
Well, there is so much of this kind of stuff going on right now, unsupervised on social media. It works. You don't have to have personal, physical, in-place interactions to get the same kind of results.
Well, get not identical results though.
They-
See,
they-
if there are people who will tell a computer a lot more than they'll tell another person, and that's
Yeah.
in an online community they might do that. Or there are people who will tell an AI. Haven't there been studies who would tell and respond better to an AI than to a person? And for those people, they would need that.
Very
The folks
old,
that
it's the
you
Elijah
had
program.
needed that
In person.
in person, right? So
And the
they-
therapeutic implications of speaking to an individual about a taboo topic in a society which considers this taboo is very different than speaking to a computer.
I don't have answers, but I can tell you that my experience, and I teach both online and in person. I was shocked initially by how much an individual will share, even online. Some of the things that they would share, I couldn't sleep at night. I worried about these folks. It does make you wonder about where is that human element. Are we really going to get completely away from that human element using AI, or is there still some room for that human interaction that, you know, while Siri or whatever, now if you say, how do I commit suicide, it's been programmed to do something other than give you directions.
To whom do they, are they, with whom are they communicating when you're getting this revealing behavior online? And in response to your question about keeping people in the loop, I think that's critical for AI, that initially you should have individuals who are providing the service and the information service, and as the AIs get better, a lot of the simple stuff could be done, but it should be context sensitive and able to be switched to human operators as the question gets sufficiently sophisticated. Think of doctors trying to get information about technology online.
Well, it boils down to creating that sense of community, whether it is online. I mean, if there's social media, my gosh, it's some of the things that they do there, but they've created that sense of community, whether it's with your family or friends or a broader audience there. Well, you got to do the same thing, whether you're in person or online or whatever modality you're working with, a hybrid, whatever. If you create that sense of community, that sense of engagement, don't you think the learning experience is going to be
Different.
Well, and just humanizing the instructor, for example, I think that has a lot of implications, at least for the topics that I taught. But I also see a temptation here, and one of my concerns with this is that almost 70% of the professors in our nation are adjunct and part-time. So there's a very strong temptation for institutions to, eliminate that even trivial, $5 an hour expense as it is, and go in this direction. And in the process, are they removing kids from actual practitioners, from people who are, doing things in the world, who have this experience, who can bring up their anecdotes that are going to make it memorable, as opposed to somebody who's just, grading papers online or doing
regurgitating from a book?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yes or no answers.
Could I just very briefly mention how I structure
Sure.
this leadership course?
Yes.
Number one, students submit their resumes to me. I go over the resume and I pick out what they've done, not only academically, but socially and in their community. And then I tell them why they are being accepted in this program, which is very, very limited. Number two, they are responsible for their own learning at the United Nations. I am a coach and a mentor. I am not a teacher. And what they do is they can use AI. They can do anything they want in creating their reports. But we get together in a circle the next morning, and they tell me that they share with me the report, and I give them feedback. Lastly, what they are looking for is not a grade. They are not graded. I give them letters of recommendation. They write their own letter of recommendation, and I modify it and add the things that I know are really important. So what they get is a letter of recommendation. They can use a bot, they can do whatever they want to, but I know them as people, not just as students or interns. Thank you.
Has anybody here seen the movie Her?
I have not.
If you haven't, go see
Ben-Hur,
it.
or
That's H-E-R.
H-E-R.
Can you
Go
give us
see
a
it.
quick summary?
It's about a guy who gets divorced, and he ends up working with this computer, a new operating system, sort of Super Siri, and they end up falling in love.
Oh,
I mean, it's something you really ought to see.
Okay.
It's coming.
I've got the trailer.
Great. Looking at the time, that's all. We're about quarter till.
Okay.
So one of the things that the professors I'm interacting with, because I also get professors to come in and spend time with us, is there's a huge amount of cheating. And this is not just the online world, what everybody projected. Apparently, there's a huge amount in conventional classrooms. It's
I caught
quite shocking to me to hear just how pervasive this is. And in fact, a friend of mine who teaches for Johns Hopkins says they run everything through a plagiarism detection
Yeah, turn it in
filter.
probably.
I would think that perhaps this might be a place where AI could be really useful. Is it?
Yeah.
Why do you think they cheat?
Because they saw it on YouTube.
Well, oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Well, I think that honestly, at least with my demographic, it was very clear that people were overwhelmed. And one of the most profound feelings that I had was just a profound sense of pity for a system that habitually overwhelms people and just keeps them in a state of exhaustion. You know, in the same kind of formulaic approach to education as, you know, would not include the fact that maybe some of my students work until 2 in the morning. And there's, you know, this whole model being applied to everyone in a way that is systemically broken.
Well, that's what most of the research shows, is that students plagiarize because they are overwhelmed, they get to the last minute, they have to turn something in, and either they knew they were plagiarizing or they worked so fast that they didn't go back and do the citations and all.
If I can get back to your subject.
Sure. Well, this is.
I have a comment I wanted to make about your survey issue. Because there are a lot of commercial products which would never have been brought out if the people doing it had believed surveys. Because most people cannot imagine something until they've seen it. And they're gonna come up with all sorts of false impressions of what it's gonna be like, and the survey may be totally inapplicable.
Well, you're right on target, which is exactly where we're going with this. If we understand the perspective, that gives us the ammunition to go back and possibly prove their perspective not 100% accurate. So that's why our first hypothesis that we're working on is, will college students even accept an AI? Will they be worried that they won't have that human interaction, that it'll all be taken away? What kind of concerns do they have? Or, as much of the research tells us, oh, the millennials and the iGens like technology and they'll embrace it very quickly. Is that really true? So we want to know what they think. Go ahead.
Would they even know the difference?
Well, it kind of reminds me back to the espionage shopping list. It's very dangerous when, let's say, you have found someone who's going to turn on their country and you want to get information out of them. Because the minute you give them a list of information of things that you're looking for, it now tells the other side exactly what you don't know. And you never want to do that. So, you know, it's the same thing. You know, you have to be careful with the way the surveys develop, how to double check it, and then how to have some other ones that kind of monitor to see, like, well, are they answering it the way you want them to or not? Because I even remember in my dissertation, I found that leadership styles in the maritime industry, I found that there's a lot of people in the maritime industry that know exactly what to say but don't do it.
Yeah.
Because you find out what they answered and then you look at their actions and there's a big discrepancy.
So here's a different way to look at the problem. Have you checked to see how many of them already think they're being taught by a bot?
Oh, that's a good question.
Especially as you have large platforms like McGraw-Hill Connect and you have adaptive learning that
Cengage,
realize it
yeah.
and they get automatic messages. A lot of students assume that there is not someone sending them those messages weekly.
Well, that's it, because a lot of times when the feedback, if you get a whole class, and they talk to each other, even
Right.
if they're online, they contact each other, and they get the same kind of comments back. They wonder if somebody actually looked at their paper or whatever it was, their project. That's a good, we gotta add that one. Some of the questions that we are looking at, and this is just, I mean, I think we have 15 questions here. I'm not going to go over all of them, but just to give you some idea, and we're interested in other thoughts like you've just brought up that we can add to this, because we don't believe this is going to be a one and done research project. We think that this is going to take some time, and hopefully we will even be, our team will even be engaged in possibly developing some of the technology that may be used in the future. But some of the things that we sat down and brainstormed about that we want to find out about is, well, what are the ethical issues? Do people think that nobody is really there, that it is just this system that is doing it, and do they think that's ethical? Will students not participate or get somebody else? Will the plagiarism increase? All of those types of things. Will our schools even accept it? What kind of challenges will we have within our own schools to accept something like that? What kind of questions will they have? Even investing in whatever we need to, because there's going to be some kind of financial investment in many of these things. How many teacher problems might the bot either solve or create? Any laws that we have to deal with, address? Any laws that may develop in the future that we should be aware of and try to address beforehand? Will Congress need to weigh in? Are there any loopholes? What about things like financing, student financing? Will this affect student financing if AI is used in many of the classes?
I kind of want to mention on financing too, because on the other end is also the thing, because schools get an amount for a number of teachers, number of students. So if AI changes that balance of students,
Ratio,
what's the ramifications to the school when it comes to funding?
Teacher certification is huge and tends to protect the folks who are there. I can tell you, as somebody who looked at maybe transitioning that direction with my life, it's just really amazing the obstacles. And I had a refugee family, and somebody who had run a school board in another country had to go through an amazing amount to get to where she could even stand in front of a classroom here. So I think those issues are
Yeah.
pretty big, actually.
And related to that is credentialing, for example. To teach at certain levels, you need certain credentials. What's the credential of the AI?
Well, so I was harassing you with that question
Yeah.
about how we build trust, how we verify AI as a safety critical application. This is a whole new level of complexity in terms of verification and validation, it seems to me.
This becomes the same issue we see in every other industry. People trying to keep their jobs.
Yeah.
And that's what this is all about. The NEA, National Education Association, is basically a labor union for teachers. And they want to keep the teachers employed. And AI can be introduced through charter schools and private schools, and that's how it's going to probably happen. And it's going to get to the point where parents who can't get their kids into these AI schools are going to demand that it be added to regular schools.
And in colleges, right? I mean, because people are paying there. But you're insisting frequently here today that AI is going to be doing every job better. I would say no, it's going to do some jobs better. It's going to transform others. The teacher, I don't think you're going to eliminate teachers. I think you're going to probably change what it means to be a teacher,
And are they willing and ready to change? And
yeah,
what kind of
that's
training
hard.
will they need? And
That's hard because we don't even know yet what the training is, right? Because we're not quite sure.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right on. We also don't know what kind of problems we could have with errors in responses.
I might do an article at some point on a customer service approach to teaching, viewing your students as clients. And I know that a lot of us have probably been online with automated bots, and we don't appreciate that customer service approach very much. And so I do believe that it limits the ability to individualize and, because it's a world of relationships, right? Which in higher education has further implications in that I'm now of the age group that is having a really hard time getting jobs because it's about relationships. It's about connections. And so how do you give out those recommendation letters because you know your students. But if your higher education comes exclusively from artificial intelligence bots, then with whom do you talk about where do I go next with my career?
Well, but that relationships thing, isn't that what the jobs of the future will be? Because that's not something that the computer's good at.
Then how do we
Dr.
train
Losky
people for
brought
that?
up the whole thing about building a team, how do you have AI and project management build the team? Well, you don't. You have the AI do things it's good at, and you have the people do the things they're good at. We don't yet know what those are, but I would imagine people don't become teachers because they have nothing else to do. People become teachers because they genuinely care about helping people learn. And you've got to couch all this in those terms, right? And motivate people to make the shift from there. I don't know what it is, but
Well, we're hoping to find out.
yeah.
We are, fears not only of the teacher, but the parents and those who are supporting the student. Let's see, what else? Did I cover most of these?
Age. There we go. I was wondering about age.
Yeah,
Like, does
okay.
an old fogey like me have more trouble with this whole idea than a millennial?
I don't.
And the other piece that goes with that, let me tell you, I got my doctorate when I was young, and I had no respect from students in the classroom for a long time because I looked their age.
I had more respect because I was their age.
But, yeah, but see, that's the
Depends on what you're
particular
teaching.
dynamic.
Well, but it was about the hierarchy, because I eliminated the hierarchy as much as possible to make it collaborative and consensual. And I think that that's something that changes with age.
That said, though, who wasn't in your classroom, right?
Mhm.
Because it wasn't the right place for them.
And it's a different subject
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah, and then the subject
And that
matter,
makes
so
a
it's,
big difference.
yeah.
Well, a few of the initial objectives we have, because those of you who weren't here when we started, one of the first things we asked was, how do you define artificial intelligence? And there are many definitions out there. So we want to narrow in and define it for our students and teachers. We're going to look at how we can assist the human factor in teaching, as well as building a common vocabulary, because depending on who you talk to and what you talk about, it can be quite a bit of confusion out there. And then we also want to identify those legal and ethical issues. Those are some of the very first things that we're going to work on. I think we already went over the research methodology, talked about the survey. Some of the information, just some of the initial information we're going to gather too on our subjects will be things like gender identification, age, marital status, education, income, political preferences, religious preferences, active, retired, military. For example, our school caters mainly to military. The majority of our students are military, which means then there's an opportunity after this round of research to go into a broader perspective of general students. But that's just some of the sample information we're going to gather. I talked about we're going to do the quantitative analysis. We'll use the ANOVA, and then we'll do a qualitative analysis. We've been talking quite a bit about that. As I mentioned earlier, I am working on, with the group, literature review, and we've been breaking it down by decades. And I'll just, because we only have a few minutes left, I will just offer one of the observations that I've seen. I've looked at the 90s, the 2000s, and 2010s. In the 90s, there was a lot of criticism about online learning and how it couldn't be the same. We talked about that earlier. Well, some of those same criticisms that we heard about online learning are the same things we're hearing about AI. And we've come a long way with online learning and just adapting to student needs, not just online, but adapting to how a student learns, that maybe we can learn from that as we move forward into our vision for AI. And with that, I will stop our formal presentation because we are going to be working on the survey and the analysis in 2020. So if you invite us back next year, maybe we can give you the results. And if we have just a couple more minutes, any comments, thoughts that anyone would like to share?
Sorry, I was late, but since you raised what I think is true, these similar criticisms for AI as online. We've also seen, and increasingly it's important to look at which students succeed and which students do not, and the least advantaged students have the hardest time with online. So I'm more interested also in outcomes that are inclusive and that are you going to build the front end with this problem in mind. Who succeeds online, it's not a good story.
Well, I don't want to give you the impression that we are only looking at AI for online. We are looking at artificial intelligence as an educational tool, no matter what the situation is. So our vision is very long-term and much broader than online. We happen to represent an online school, so we are focusing right now with our students and our faculty just to get their perspectives and then build on that. But you're right. We hope that AI will kind of level that out, that those students who maybe need special tools, or I'm not choosing the right words here, but something that can be customized to each student. We had talked about that, so that at the end of a course, they're all at the same level. But they've had whatever tools they needed individually to bring them there.
But I think you were talking more about societal inequities between students in different locations, and how that's impacting their ability to study. If you're worried about your next meal, it's hard to be worried about
It's not just
doing
that,
an
it's
assignment.
also, I'm at a state university, SUNY.
Okay.
So I have seen over 15 years, our students are changing, and some of that's through initiatives to try to be more inclusive, first generation, all of these things. These students come with different kinds of needs in terms of their language capacity. So we use AI right now in our messaging, don't we? It suggests little responses. For some of my students, that response, they cannot understand it. Again, it's about language, so it takes a lot more reinforcing and working with understanding that student. So maybe AI can adaptively do that with a student. But I'm concerned that, again, will the resources go in that direction? Will the design, will that be important to the design? And it's, so already I see the difference in the little bit of AI we have now. And so our students increasingly, anxiety, mental health, meds, these need a lot more caregiving than we've ever had to do. And so if that's how our students need more of that, I'm concerned that they're gonna get less of it if we move in that direction.
So one question I would have is I've worked with my young engineers, and a lot of people have been stopped in that pipeline. Are we seeing, or is there more anxiety, for example, or did we just let those people drop out earlier in the pipeline in the past? You know, I
We
know,
have high-performing students with anxiety too.
yeah,
So
but they might not have succeeded before either, right? Because, I mean, an engineering school used to be, they expected 2 out of 3 of the students to not make it through. And a lot of very smart people didn't, you know, that's one of the reasons, things I'm finding now, well, why didn't you finish college? Why did you join the Navy? Well, college wasn't working, you know, for various reasons. And now we have to go and we have to solve that problem so that we can help them realize the next level potential. Unfortunately, you know, they may be 40, but better late than never, right? So I wonder how much, you know, I know a few years earlier, I would have been a casualty. And I graduated my first degree 40 years ago. But, you know, I'm wondering do we really have more of these problems, or are we actually, is this a sign of our success in some way?
I think philosophy might have changed because, you know, I have found that more academic institutions are about retention and about helping students and about being successful, rather than in the past, educational institutions had a level of prestige because they had a high failure rate. You know, I remember my first day as an undergraduate, they said, you know, we had our little session with all the incoming, they said, look to the right, look to the left, one of you's not gonna be here.
Right. And I succeeded only because I went to a school that had begun that transition. People live on, wait a minute, is that the right way to do things?
Right.
And that's why I wondered, is this because we're actually succeeding with more people, that we have more challenges and?
So
Right.
your hypothesis that we're seeing these challenges because we're actually trying to help students rather than try to push them off to something else?
Yeah,
I don't know.
but
It's
I'm
There's a
wondering.
lot of evidence
possible.
on, you know, from health-based sources.
Okay,
Yes.
that was my question,
If
yeah.
you look at how
Yeah.
many students are first in their family to go to college,
Yeah.
they don't have the background in growing up.
Great.
That makes a difference.
Yeah, but you just said it, that you're saying that the data that's not related to school is showing a higher instance, so maybe,
And all
yeah.
students, there's less reading and ability to read. This is, and so how is this gonna help that problem? Maybe it can.
That's a question that I have, because AI, computers, they're great tools, but do we really need them? What I'm concerned about, and I hear this from other young people, they do term papers, and they are allowed to use whatever they find on Wikipedia, YouTube, as authenticity, as a credible information source. And then the other thing, and this is not just with young people, other people, they Google, and whatever they read, they believe.
Right.
And 80% of it is not true. So I'm scared that we're regressing back to not being human, and not thinking, and not being innovative. And I love the approach you take with your young people, because that gets part to what I'm concerned about.
Well, we're really running close on time.
The greatest open book exam, I only took one in my college life, was Tom Pendleton, professor at Iona College, said, to this exam you can bring anything you want or anyone you want.
Really?
So if you want to bring a friend who knows this topic inside and out, you can write your blue book exam with your friend, or with paper and pen and books, or nothing. As up to you, but you can bring anything or anyone. Greatest test ever.
How did that work out?
It was fabulous. People brought their sisters, their brothers, their cousins. It was sensational.
Well, and interestingly enough, that's how you solve problems in today's world, right?
Yes.
You do it as a team.
Collaborative, yeah.
Phone a
Yeah.
friend.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for spending
you.
some time with us today. I really appreciate your comments. You've given us a lot to think about and more questions to add, which is what we were looking for, hoping for today. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great weekend.